I've jumped on to do another live for you, and there's a really important issue that I want to discuss today because I've discovered when I'm doing therapy that even people who have had a lot of therapy don't understand the basics of how the mind works. And when you are, it's really important that you understand, kind of even on a very basic fundamental level, what your mind is doing and why. And the interesting thing is that when you understand it, you can actually get your mind to work for you. You can recognize what your mind is doing, and you can then collaborate with your mind because you can accept what it's doing or you can reject what it's doing and ask it to do something else. That's when you understand what is happening. It's a really great tool. It's a great thing to be able to do. So I thought I would just jump on and explain in very simple terms how that actually works. And also how it affects people, particularly that are suffering from the effects of abuse, obviously. Okay, so one of the rules of your mind is that your mind's main job is to keep you safe. Your mind's job is to keep you alive. Okay, so in saying that, your mind doesn't actually care whether you thrive, it just wants you to survive. That which is why whenever you attempt to do something new, your mind literally goes into overdrive within a few seconds to keep you where you are. Because this is what your mind recognizes as familiar, because this is another rule of your mind, that it likes what's familiar, because to your mind, what's familiar keeps you safe. Hi guys, thanks for joining. Got Reese and Kadir here. Thank you. Okay, so your mind is and this is very, very old DNA that your mind is running on. You have to understand that our society and our environment have all moved on, but your mind is still working on very, very old programming. And the way I like to think of it is that whenever you try to do something different out of your comfort zone or out of your environment or something new, because your mind doesn't care whether you thrive or not, so it doesn't reason, oh yes, this is a good thing, it's going to give you a new solution, or this is going to be good for your growth. What your mind thinks is, no, I need to keep you safe. And it literally releases a fear reaction to keep you where you are. And I always say it's as if there is a saber-toothed tiger round every corner. And that is how your mind works to keep you where you are, and why your mind works to keep you safe and to keep you alive. And this helps you understand some of the obstacles that you come across when you're trying to do something different, even when you're trying to escape a situation that is not good for you. No, your mind isn't thinking that this isn't good for you. This is what is familiar to your mind, and part of your mind wants you to stay there rather than attempt something new. And this is why we all experience this fear all the time whenever we are faced with something new. So that's a very simple explanation for that. And the other thing is, this is all about the subconscious mind now. Your mind will always give you what it thinks you want. Okay, now, and sometimes, or most of the time, the information that your mind is running on is old information. It's old information that you collected when you were young from your environment, from things that were happening to you, and your old information that your mind is still running on created those major neural pathways, those major thought patterns that actually run your life today. So let's think of this. Your mind goes to what it knows and what's familiar, and it gives you what it thinks you want. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of child sex abuse now. If you think about this, so when you were in this situation as a child, I won't go into the details, but let's just talk about how you were feeling. So you were feeling vulnerable, you were feeling powerless, you were feeling as if you didn't have a voice and you didn't have choice. And a very, very common thing that I come across here, especially with weight issues, is a lot of people who have weight issues have abuse in their background. And the way we explain this is that when we look at this in hypnosis, we go back to this time where you had these feelings that you weren't enough, you weren't strong enough, you weren't big enough. And daily, hourly, by the minute, you are telling your mind that you wish you were stronger, you wish you were bigger. And look what happens. Later on, your mind is still running on this thought process, and it gives you what it thinks you want. What it thinks you want is to be bigger and stronger, and it doesn't specify in what way. And what we end up with is overweight people who don't know that they have this programming running in the background. And I know this sounds really strange, but I come across this all the time. People that can see themselves in their past wishing they were bigger, and then looking at themselves today and just thinking, oh my goodness, I need to stop my mind processing things as if I'm still that scared and vulnerable child. And this is what happens all the time. So your mind gives you what it thinks you want. So that's just one example. The other thing it thinks you want, it thinks that you want to be safe. It thinks that you want to stay where you are, which is why change is always so difficult too. So when we start to combine the way that your mind is working is when we can see why we get these very strange, almost phenomenon sometimes, where we're trying to do something, we're trying to get out of a situation that isn't good for us, and somehow the mind is jumping in and keeping us stuck. And trauma isn't the only area where we experience that. We experience that in many areas of our lives, and you'll find every time you try to do something new, you feel like you get stuck, you get compelled to stay where you are. And the interesting thing is, once you recognize that this is one of the rules of your mind, that your mind wants to keep you safe, it wants to stay with what's familiar, and it wants to give you what you said you wanted a long time ago, is how you can understand how all these things are working in your present environment, in your present situation, to keep you where you are. But the good thing is that once you understand it, as these things come up for you, you can start to rationalize it. It's like if I'm in a situation now and I'm thinking about doing something new, and I still experience that fear factor, but I don't let it influence me, because I can actually recognize it for what it is, acknowledge it, and simply say, no, that's okay. Thanks for the reminder, but I don't need this. I'm going to do my own thing anyway, and I'm able to quiet the mind in that way. Now, the interesting thing when you look at this from the point of view of trauma is that the reason your mind keeps replaying your trauma and keeps making it a reality for you is that your mind is actually, this is in the context of keeping you safe again, your mind is actually reminding you of a situation that didn't serve you. You know it didn't serve you, but your mind is reminding you so that you don't go back to that situation. It's bringing this to the forefront all the time, and kind of its message is, hey, look, this was an awful and dangerous situation. Don't go back there. No? So I hope that makes sense as well. I know that has helped a lot of people because they don't understand why this is why this keeps replaying. And people will say, why do I keep getting these flashbacks? Well, the job of the flashbacks, as far as your mind is concerned, is to remind you not to go back there. In your logical mind, you know that you're not going back. but this is not your logical mind that is running all your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and your habit. We're talking about the subconscious mind here, which is why when we're dealing with trauma, hypnosis is such an amazing tool, because we can go back and actually look at these things, and we can change them. We can't change what happened, but we can change your perspective, so that your conscious mind, along with your subconscious mind, gives your conscious mind a different message, and both of them will behave in a different way to change your reality of what this is for you. And that is how we lessen or even remove the impact of trauma when we use hypnosis. So there's quite a lot about the mind here. I just want to make sure that I've covered it. Now, another important thing that the mind does, and this is so important in terms of trauma and in terms of everything else. But just imagine that you know that in everything you're doing, this will affect every aspect of your life. Your mind reacts to the words and images that you feed it. This is absolute fact. So you need to be very certain and sure about the words and images that you feed your mind. This is why it's very important to never say that you can't do something. If you tell your mind that you can't do something, your mind isn't going to reason with you and start, oh yes you can, you could do this, you could do that. Your mind likes to stick with what's familiar, don't forget, and it's quite lazy. It doesn't want challenges. It wants to stick with what is. So if you tell your mind that you can't do something, your mind is going to just accept that. It's a completely different thing if you start to say to your mind, how can I do that? Now, if you start to ask your mind, how can I do that? Yes, you're going to get the little bits of fear coming in as your mind tries to keep you stuck in the familiar. But how can I do that is a completely different concept and will evoke a completely different reaction as your mind starts to work with you to find the answer to that question. And you can do this about everything. Very important, the words and images that you tell yourself. Now, I've said before that one of the major causes of depression is the critical and harsh words that we say to ourselves, because those words create images and we become our reality. We become what we tell ourselves we are. So if you're constantly feeding yourself negative words and images about yourself, about other people, your environment, what you can do, who you are, what you can achieve, everything, then that becomes your reality. Whereas if you constantly feed into yourself positive words and images about yourself, that changes your reality. That gradually becomes your reality. You end up with this positive neural pathway created instead of this negative one, which is literally why don't we talk about people and say, oh, they're a really negative person? And it's literally almost everything they do or say is negative. They always go to the negative because it's that negative neural pathway is literally been created and is what they go to first. So what we want to be is a positive person where you have this positive neural pathway created, where our first port of call is to look at things in a positive way, to find the way forward rather than to feel stuck, and just to find the positive in everything and everyone. And we all know that those are two very different concepts. So the words and images that you feed yourself are so important. So they're basically the rules of the mind, and you can use them to collaborate with your mind. And I hope that you can see how just understanding this can really benefit you. So let's just cap them over. So your mind responds to the words and images that you feed it. And just practice this for yourself. Just see what happens when you maybe if you're thinking about something in a negative way, just consciously shift that to a positive and see what happens. See the different path that your thoughts go down and the different action you can take and the alternative result that you will then get from that. So your mind reacts to the words and images that you feed it. Your mind's job is to keep you safe and to keep you alive. It doesn't actually care if you thrive. Okay, so remember that as well. It's to keep you alive, which means sticking with the familiar, which is constantly invoking this fear factor that stops you moving out of your comfort zone unless you recognize it. When you recognize it and you acknowledge it, it's much easier then to put it aside. Say, yes, I see what this is. This is my mind keeping me alive, but I want to thrive. Okay, I want to thrive. And just keep telling your mind as well that you don't just want to stay alive, you want to thrive. I want to grow, I want to achieve something, I want to learn something, I want to go somewhere, and just keep overriding. And it's so much easier when you recognize these patterns. So, and the other thing is that your mind will give you what it thinks you want. And it's important to recognize that a lot of the time it's running on very old information. It's running on old neural pathways that were created really when they were age appropriate, when you were a child. So that's why so many of the thoughts and actions and habits that you have are still based on how you felt when you were a child, especially related to trauma. You still have all that running through, which explains fear and anxiety. I mean, logically, you would look at everything as an adult and say, well, I know that that can't actually hurt me anymore. And you would just be able to put aside what happened as what happened as a child. And the reason you can't do that is because your mind has this neural pathway that was created then that has taught you to be afraid. It's taught you to be anxious. It's taught you not to trust people. And it was age appropriate. It was age appropriate. It was environment appropriate. It was situationally appropriate. And it was how your mind was protecting you as much as it could then. But you don't need that now. And we need to, as quickly as possible, change that thought process and change those neural thought pathways to something that serves the person you are today, the adult you are today, the situation, the environment that you have that is completely different to what was when those thought processes were put in place. So anyway, so there's a description basically of how the mind works. I hope you can take something from that and make that work for you. Take something from it so that you can start to rationalize when things are happening with you. This is why it's so great with anxiety to be able to do this, because we understand that anxiety comes from fear. It's a fear of not having control, and it's rooted in your past. And what the anxiety and fear exercise that I always do with my clients is obviously the breathing, where you do the deep breathing to calm yourself down. But then it's also to recognize that's not me, to recognize that this is a fear coming in that belongs to another time, another place, and that what is driving your fear and anxiety doesn't apply anymore. For most people, it doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't apply to the situation that they're in. And if you are in a situation where you're being emotionally and physically abused and you have all these fears and anxieties all the time, then please recognize that this is your mind keeping you safe, reminding you that this is not a good situation for you to be in, and that you need to do something about this. That there's two different factors there about the fear and how that is helping you. So one that's helping you and one that's not. but very good to recognize the two aspects there of fear and anxiety and those two different roles. So I'll leave that with you. If you've got any questions, please ask them. If you've got any comments, yeah, just ask away and I'll do my best to answer everything for you.